I'll give an overview of how we understand FERPA and how it applies to ALD. So I'll assume that most folks know what FERPA is, the federal law, Buckley Amendments also known as, regarding privacy. It's essentially withholding, or it's essentially guaranteeing the privacy of students in college, so that if they're 18 or older, so that particularly parents can't call a professor and say, how's my son doing, or what's his grade. So it protects private information of students unless they sign something that says that that information can be shared. One of the key distinctions within FERPA and how it really relates to Alpha Lambda Delta is the difference between two pieces of information and the way that the university defines them. And those two things are educational records and directory information. So an educational record are those records directly related to the student and their institution. It includes their grades, their transcript, what classes they're taking, their course schedule, health records, financial aid information, financial information, discipline, student discipline files. So those you can understand are protected pieces of information that unless the student says it's okay for the university to share that, that is held private. Then the second category is called directory information, and that's a class of information that FERPA in particular permits or allows an institution to share. And that's where it gets a little tricky for Alpha Lambda Delta, but it can include directory information, might include their name, a cell phone number, an email address, a photograph, their major, what college level, class level, junior, senior, freshman, the dates of that they were enrolled, enrollment status, things like that. So oftentimes the directory information is what we rely on, and because it usually allows the university to share the name and the email address. And of course, the distinction with Alpha Lambda Delta is that we're just asking for, or you're asking on behalf of ALD, for those that met the cutoff of 3.5 or higher in their first semester. You're not asking for the actual grade. So you don't need to know that Jane Smith got 3.75. You just need to know a list of all those who had 3.5 or above. So it's not, so getting the list for Alpha Lambda Delta is not revealing on the university's part an educational record. It's considered directory information. So that's what we rely on, and that has worked for many years since FERPA was passed, and it should, in our opinion, it's what should work, and that there shouldn't be issues. However, lately, in the last couple of years, FERPA has allowed the institution to define directory information however they'd like. And so for every college in the country, they get to define what directory information means. And some of them have decided that email address, for example, or anything having to do with status of like a cutoff for the grade is considered an educational record and not directory. So most of our chapters this is not a problem for, but some and more are increasingly becoming problematic. So the question then is, can you speak, if you have this issue, can you speak to your registrar or whoever oversees FERPA on the campus to be clear that we believe that the Alpha Lambda Delta request is directory information and should be okay to be shared. Again, because you're not asking for the grade. So that's sort of the key difference and the key change that we're seeing for the chapters we're hearing about who are having trouble with getting the list of eligible students. So a couple things to do around that if you are having that issue. You know, try and have a conversation with your registrar if you can. One school, more than one, I think at least 2 or maybe even 3, have gone this route, which is a workaround for this issue, is that the registrar will send an email to those that met the eligibility. Hopefully you get to craft that email, and it could be something like, we're notifying you to let you know you've met the criteria for Alpha Lambda Delta. If you'd like to be invited to join, so it's not a real invitation, it's just letting them know they met an eligibility. If they'd like to be notified that, or if they'd like to be invited, they would let somebody in the registrar know, and the registrar will collect a list. I don't know how, for one school I know in Texas, they do it this way. And so the advisor periodically, maybe once a week, gets a list of students who said, yes, thank you, I'm glad I'm eligible. Yes, I'd like to be invited. The advisor gets that list and periodically adds them to MHS and sends them an invitation. So that's one way that it's worked. And it's actually, I think, worked okay for them, as long as they can be sure that the registrar's email is appropriate and says everything you want it to say. And timeliness, you want to get that started early so that you're not waiting months and months for a list. Another workaround is or at least something to ask about in terms of directory information, is oftentimes if they give you a little trouble for the ALD list, oftentimes the dean's list is public information. And so any student who made the dean's list is probably 99% of the time eligible for ALD, because it's, dean's lists are usually the minimum is a 3.5 GPA. So you could just ask for the dean's list of your first year students if they treat that any different from what you're asking and not getting. So those are some of the things that have worked. Hopefully you can, again, have a meeting with the registrar and try and find out what it is the issues are. And if they won't give you the list, then hopefully they'll send something on behalf of the student or to the students, and then the students can essentially sort of opt in to receiving an email invitation. The other last issue I'll mention about this and then answer any questions is there's another level of what you might want to be asking for. Minimum for ALD, we need first name, last name, and email address, because that's really what MHS uses. So another level, though, is the home address, or what we always like to call the permanent home address. Not their local address, not their residence hall. We want mom and dad's house or guardian. So that should often, if you're going to send something home, and we highly recommend it, and I'll talk about our postcard in a second, but it doesn't hurt to just ask for that as well. And sometimes that might be defined differently. So a home address might be directory information, and it might be an educational record. It's going to depend. So you might get it and you might not. And in fact, I've heard from some campuses who can only get the home address and they can't get the email address. So if you can get one or the other, we can help get an invitation out. If you can only get a home address but no email, that's better than nothing. And it's best if you can get both. Minimum email and home helps. If you want to participate in our postcard program, contact us, where we offer a postcard that we'll send to the homes of students, and we cover all the costs for that. the printing of the card and the mailing of it. We just need an Excel list of those home addresses. And you need to work with us on coordinating that whole thing. But that's certainly another level that some universities have a hard time with. The college won't release the home addresses, but some do. So that's an overview of FERPA. Emily, I'm not sure if you are having any issues around this topic. Okay, so within the chapter, who can see what? Okay, that's a good question. So we leave it up. So the question is, who can see what? What about if you have a grad student advisor or an undergrad? Sometimes, many times, officers help with the ALD invitation, and some even have access to MHS and help that process along. So we leave it up to the university. We don't have rules and regulations around who can see what in terms of your students and your grad students. If you want to allow them to have access to MHS, we allow that, and we can add them to the system so they can be an admin. So basically what that means is whatever is in MHS, the student, officer or grad student would be able to see. But again, remember that there are no grades. It's their name and their email address. And what everyone would know, if you're in ALD or you're invited to join ALD, by that mere fact, that means you have a 3.5 or higher GPA. So everyone would know that, but they wouldn't know the actual grade. And then I guess when a student joins and they might add more information, I don't know if Trish, you want to chime in about this one. I'm not sure that admins can even see that. Like if a student joins and they log into MHS and add more information like their address, does an advisor have access to that?
No, I don't think they do. I think you can run, like if they change their email address, you can run a report and it would be updated to that new email address, but I don't think they can, I don't think you can see that information.
Right. So Emily, I don't know if that answered your question, but essentially, the only information we have is, like I said, name, email, name and email. And so if you have students with access to MHS, then they'll see that too, or access to your own records, whatever you keep in your office. And if that's not okay by the university, maybe double check that, but I'm not sure that would be much of an issue, given that it's not what we consider not educational records. Great. Okay, good question. And this came up, the question is, can you talk a little bit about the parent notifications, the letter or the postcard home, and how this is compliant with FERPA? So this came up in the last FERPA webinar we offered, because it was an issue for a particular campus. I believe it was UT Austin, and she's the advisor at UT Austin's chapter said she had to be very careful about the wording. So a couple things. We recommend that if it's a letter or a postcard, and even our postcard is very generic, but it's addressed to and geared towards the language on the postcard, and the to address is to the student, not the parent. And so while we know it's a postcard, even if it was a letter in an envelope, oftentimes that gets opened by a parent. But if it's a postcard, you know, it can be seen by the parent, but it isn't addressed to them. It's addressed to the student. And because hopefully they'll see it too. Oftentimes the postcard is, you know, we try and over the break it can be sent home over breaks, whether it's the winter break, the holiday break. We're still on break for many campuses who don't start until after Martin Luther King. Spring breaks, I mean, there are times when the postcard is really, I mean, it is meant to be seen by the student. So that's a way that addresses FERPA, that it is addressed to the student. If it's a concern about the parent, particularly if it's a letter, then it can be fairly vague in terms of the wording around eligibility. So it could, and I've asked for an example of what UT Austin sends, and I haven't gotten it yet. So if I get it, I'll share it with you, Emily, and maybe even put it up online to see what kind of wording she came up with, because it definitely related to FERPA, and the wording was based on a review by her FERPA folk, what was okay to use. So I don't think it specifically said, your son or daughter got a 3.5 or higher. I think it just was something a little bit more vague, that they are going to be invited to join, and please encourage them to look at their email and consider it. But if your letter, if it's a folded letter in an envelope and it's addressed to the student, my suggestion is to address it to the student. And that protects you, that it's meant, if the student tells mom and dad on the phone, yes, please, yes, you may open my letter and please read it to me, then the parents are going to see it. But I know there are ways to send something to parents that would work too. Publishing membership, what do we need to know? For example, if we want to share lists out to the campus community to share, congratulations. Okay, that's a good question. That hasn't, in terms of, so once a student joins, not that they were invited, membership, yeah, okay. So, you know, that I haven't heard that question before in the past in terms of membership. I'm not sure we say anything about it, that it's going to still be private or that it's public. Either way, I don't think we address it, at least from our end. Something you might want to consider is an opt-in or out option within the invitation, if that's a concern. So I think this is a good question that I should bring up with others. I think, honestly, I think my assumption is that for the most part, chapters have treated as public information. If you joined, then it's okay if you put out like a list in the school newspaper or some daily email to faculty and staff that goes out and said these 20 students joined. Or for larger chapters, they're not going to do that probably because they might have hundreds and hundreds, but might not be a bad idea to put something in your welcome email when they join, or a follow-up email, or maybe put it in your, I wouldn't put it in the invitation itself, but maybe in the welcome email that comes after they join, to give some examples of how this information might be published. And my suggestion is for them to opt out and not in. So I would say something like, congratulations, thanks for joining, induction ceremonies this date, more information coming soon. If you have any concerns about your membership being made public on campus, click here. So they're opting out, not in. Out if they have a concern. I don't know that many chapters even do much with their membership, with the information. I think it's a great idea to put something out there to the campus community to share the new members this year or whatever it might be. I'm not sure we have a lot of that happening around our chapter. That's a nice idea. And if there are any institutions watching this that are having trouble, again, with the educational record versus directory information and getting first name, last name, and email address and or home address, get in touch with me, and we can work with you to hopefully get your registrar to see that this complies, and that we have very strict privacy policies too, that we don't So information, contact information, we don't share it. We don't even really email students at all. We leave that up to the chapter and the advisor. So we don't really do anything with it other than process membership. Okay, if nothing else, then very good. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Thanks so much.